Practical Mind Reading by William Walker Atkinson. Lesson 1. The Scientific Hypothesis of Mental Ether Waves. Until recently, the general populace remained in a state of nearly absolute ignorance regarding the profound verities of thought transference, thought projection, telepathy, or mind reading. Admittedly, scattered instances existed wherein a select few scientists were diligently investigating and zealously unveiling the concealed realities pertaining to these subjects. However, the majority of the public was either wholly unacquainted with the topic or intensely skeptical of any matters related thereto, subjecting to derision any audacious intellectual who ventured to articulate an interest or belief in these momentous scientific phenomena. Yet how starkly different is the present era. From every quarter, we are apprised of the marvels of thought transference, or telepathy, as it is designated. Men of science author treatises and instruct upon its captivating manifestations. Furthermore, even the general public has acquired significant awareness of this nascent science and accords it varying degrees of credence, commensurate with the individual's level of intelligence and existing knowledge regarding the subject. Attend to the following observations articulated by some of the most preeminent scientists of the age. Professor William James, the distinguished scholar at Harvard University, states, "When, from our current vantage of advancement, we retrospectively survey the antecedent stages of human cogitation, be it scientific or theological, we are astounded that a universe which appears to us as a complication of such vastness and mystery could ever have appeared to any observer as so diminutive and simplistic an entity. Whether it be Descartes' world or Newton's, whether that of the materialists of the preceding century or that of the Bridgewater treatises of our own, it invariably appears the same to us, incredibly devoid of perspective and limited in scope. Even the consciousness of Lyell, Faraday, Mill, and Darwin regarding their respective disciplines is already commencing to assume an infantile and innocent aspect. These observations possess a twofold significance, deriving from the fact that they were enunciated by Professor James in his capacity as the president of the Society for Psychical Research. The distinguished English scientist Sir William Crookes, in his presidential address to the Royal Society at Bristol, England, some years past, remarked, "Were I now determining to introduce these inquiries to the scientific community for the first time, I would select a point of departure distinct from that of antiquity, where we previously commenced. It would be prudent to initiate with telepathy, with the fundamental law, as I conceive it to be, that thoughts and images may be transferred from one mind to another without the agency of the recognized sensory organs, that knowledge may permeate the human mind without communication via any hitherto known or acknowledged methods. Although this inquiry has elicited significant facts regarding the mind, it has not yet attained the scientific stage of certainty requisite for it to be usefully presented before one of our sections. Consequently, I shall confine myself to delineating the direction in which scientific investigation may legitimately advance. If telepathy occurs, we are presented with two physical facts: the physical alteration in the brain of A, the suggester, and the analogous physical alteration in the brain of B, the recipient of the suggestion. Between these two physical events, a train of physical causes must necessarily exist. Whenever the connecting sequence of intermediate causes begins to be unveiled, the inquiry will then fall within the purview of one of the sections of the British Association. Such a sequence can only transpire through an intervening medium. All phenomena of the universe are presumably strictly continuous, and it is scientifically unsound to invoke mysterious agencies when, with every fresh advance in knowledge, it is demonstrated that ether vibrations possess powers and attributes abundantly adequate for any demand, including the transmission of thought. Professor Crookes subsequently proceeded to state, "It is hypothesized by certain physiologists that the essential cells of nerves do not actually touch, but are separated by a narrow gap which widens during sleep while narrowing almost to extinction during mental activity. This condition bears such a singular resemblance to that of a Branly or Lodge coherer as to suggest a further analogy. The structure of brain and nerve being similar, it is conceivable that masses of such nerve coherers may be present in the brain, the special function of which may be to receive impulses transmitted from the exterior through the connecting sequence of ether waves of the appropriate order of magnitude. Röntgen has familiarized us with an order of vibrations of extreme minuteness compared with the smallest waves with which we have hitherto been acquainted, and of dimensions comparable to the distances between the centers of the atoms of which the material universe is constructed. Furthermore, there exists no reason to believe that we have here reached the limit of frequency. It is established that the action of thought is accompanied by specific molecular movements in the brain, and here we possess physical vibrations capable, by virtue of their extreme minuteness, of acting directly upon individual molecules, while their rapidity approaches that of the internal and external movements of the atoms themselves. A formidable range of phenomena must be scientifically sifted before we effectually grasp a faculty so strange, so bewildering, and for ages so inscrutable, as the direct action of mind upon mind. It has been asserted that nothing worthy of proof can be definitively proven, nor yet disproven. While this may have held true in the past, it is valid no longer. The science of our century has forged instruments of observation and analysis from which the absolute novice may derive benefit. Science has cultivated and fashioned the average mind into habits of exactitude and disciplined perception. In so doing, it has fortified itself for undertakings higher, broader, and incomparably more wondrous than even the wisest among our progenitors could have conceived. Like the souls in Plato's myth that pursue the chariot of Zeus, it has ascended to a vantage point far above the terrestrial sphere. It is henceforth within the province of science to transcend all that we currently presume to understand regarding matter, and to acquire new glimpses of a profounder scheme of cosmic law. In the days of ancient Egypt, a renowned inscription was engraved above the portal of the Temple of Isis. "I am whatever has been, is, or ever shall be, and my veil no man hath yet lifted." However, modern seekers of truth do not thus confront nature, that term which signifies the baffling mysteries of the universe. Steadily and unflinchingly, we strive to pierce the innermost heart of nature, proceeding from what she is, to reconstruct what she has been, and to prophesy what she yet shall become. We have lifted veil after veil, and her countenance grows more beautiful, august, and wondrous with every barrier that is withdrawn. Camille Flammarion, the eminent French astronomer, is a proponent of thought transference and mind reading, and has penned the following expression of his convictions regarding this subject. We summarize, therefore, our preceding observations with the conclusion that one mind may act at a distance upon another, devoid of the habitual medium of words or any other visible means of communication. It appears to us altogether unreasonable to reject this conclusion if we accept the facts. There exists nothing unscientific, nothing romantic, in admitting that an idea may influence the brain from a distance. The action of one human being upon another from a distance is a scientific fact. It is as certain as the existence of Paris, of Napoleon, of oxygen, or of Sirius. The same authority has also stated, "There can be no doubt that our psychical force generates a movement of the ether, which transmits itself afar like all movements of ether and becomes perceptible to brains in harmony with our own. the transformation of a psychic action into an ethereal movement, and the reverse may be analogous to that which occurs in a telephone, wherein the receptive plate, which is identical to the plate at the opposing terminus, reconstructs the transmitted sonorous movement, not by means of sound but through electricity. We have cited this distinguished authority extensively to demonstrate conclusively that the noble science of mind reading is acknowledged and endorsed by the preeminent figures of modern science, and furthermore, to afford our scholars the advantage of contemporary scientific postulations regarding the subject. Within this treatise, we shall devote minimal discourse to theoretical speculation, restricting our focus instead to verifiable tenets and practical tuition. Science has established and substantiated that thoughts are capable of being conveyed from one intellect to another, spanning, in certain instances, vast geographical distances. Yet it has not hitherto elucidated the enigma of the why of the subject, remaining satisfied for the present with an explication of the how. The closest approximation to an accurate hypothesis appears to be that which draws a parallel between the human mind and the wireless telegraph, positing that the vibrations of thought traverse the ether in a manner analogous to the undulations of this high order of electricity. The intellect of one individual functions as the transmitter of the wireless apparatus, whilst the mind of the counterpart operates as the receiver within the same instrumental configuration. Indisputably, vibrations are initiated within the cerebrum during the process of cogitation, and there exist thought waves comparable to the undulations of electricity. Science apprises us that there occurs a thermal elevation within the human brain during intervals of intellectual exertion, and furthermore, that perpetual chemical alterations occur within the structure whenever the cerebral cells are active. This phenomenon is analogous to the generation of electricity within a battery and indisputably operates via an identical mechanism in engendering vibrations and transmitting them to the cerebrum of another. Sir William Crookes, in the address previously cited, delineates the trajectory of scientific theories pertaining to this matter. However, this constitutes the extent of our commentary regarding the theoretical aspects of mind reading. We shall now proceed to the pragmatic instruction itself. The student is implored, however, to perpetually retain within his consciousness the axiom that mind propels itself in waves from one brain to another, precisely as electricity traverses from the transmitter to the receiver. By sustaining this visualization within your intellect, you shall possess the entirety of the practical hypothesis, in encapsulated form, immediately before you, enabling you to proceed with commensurate efficacy. Lesson 2. Statistical Validation and Psychical Research Case Studies. As we have articulated in the preceding chapter, the general populace is progressively becoming cognizant of the reality of mental transference, and it is hardly requisite to dedicate time and space to substantiating the reality of these phenomena in the present era, notwithstanding that, merely a few years prior, a treatise on this subject would have necessitated a composition consisting principally of evidentiary support and proofs. Nevertheless, it may prove beneficial for us to undertake a cursory examination of the nature of the evidence contained within this work. Nearly every individual has encountered evidence of mind reading or thought transference within their personal existence. Almost everyone has experienced moments in another's company wherein one party offers a remark, prompting the other, somewhat startled, to exclaim, "Why, that is precisely what I intended to articulate," or words of similar import. Nearly everyone has possessed the experience of knowing what a second individual was preparing to utter before that person spoke. Likewise common is the experience of contemplating a specific individual merely a few moments before that person appeared within sight. Many of us have suddenly found ourselves thinking of an individual who had been absent from our minds for months, or even years, when, abruptly, the person himself would appear. These instances are so prevalent as to be generally recognized without question. These occurrences have given rise to the two common adages: speak of the devil and his imps appear, or speak of angels and you hear the rustle of their wings. Mark Twain, in an article published several years ago, alluded to a stratagem he had frequently practiced, that of composing a letter to an individual regarding a specific subject, addressing the envelope and enclosing the missive, and subsequently rending the entire assemblage into fragments rather than dispatching it. He asserted that, in a significant percentage of such instances, he would receive, within a brief interval, a communiqué from the individual to whom the destroyed missive had been addressed, answering the inquiries posed or otherwise discoursing along the same lines as those of the obliterated letter. We have known of this experiment being attempted on individuals thousands of miles distinct from the writer, and also in instances wherein the other party had not been heard of for many years. There is a field open for experimentation along these lines which some of our students might investigate with profit and satisfaction. Perhaps the most superior evidence of mind reading currently at the disposal of the public is that located within the archives of the English Society for Psychical Research. The experiments conducted by members of this society and other investigators have resulted in the accumulation of a veritable mass of facts, more than sufficient to fully establish the correctness of the theory of mind reading. Series of carefully managed experiments have been conducted, the results of which have conclusively proven that the thought waves set into motion by the mind of one person may be consciously received by the mind of another. We shall quote here from the reports of those investigators in order to demonstrate to you the significant results that have been obtained, and to permanently lay to rest any lingering doubts regarding the reality of the phenomena that may yet find lodgment within your mind. Remember, if you please, that these committees were composed of some of the leading scientific authorities of England, men whose standing and reliability, as well as whose judgment, were beyond question. These cases form a part of the scientific records of the English Society. The Creary Experiments. One of the interesting series of experiments conducted by members of the English Society was that involving the family of the Reverend A. M. Creary, of Derbyshire, England. This investigation was initiated upon hearing the report of the Reverend Mr. Creary regarding a number of experiments he had conducted with his 4 children. He reported that he had commenced by practicing a variation of that which is generally designated as the willing game, in which one of the party departs the room, and the company selects some object to be concealed, after which the individual is recalled to the room while the company concentrates its collective mind upon the hidden object, and the seeker eventually discovers it by means of mind reading. The reverend gentleman stated in his report to the society, "We began by selecting the simplest objects in the room, then chose names of towns, people, dates, cards out of a pack, lines from different poems, or anything or series of ideas that those present could maintain before the mind steadily. The children seldom committed a mistake. I have witnessed 17 cards, selected by myself, identified correctly in succession without a single error. We soon ascertained that a great deal depended upon the steadiness with which the ideas were maintained before the minds of the thinkers, and upon the energy with which they willed the ideas to pass. I may state that this faculty is not confined to the members of one family. It is much more general than we imagine. To verify this conclusion, I invited 2 of a neighbor's children to join us in our experiment, and very excellent results we secured from them. The Society subsequently initiated a series of meticulous investigations extending over a period of 1 year. The utmost care was exercised to obviate the possibility of fraud, collusion, errors, or external influences. The experiments were conducted partly in Mr. Creary's residence and partly in rooms selected by the members of the investigating committee. Having selected one of the children at random, the child would be escorted from the room and, accompanied by a member of the committee, would wait beyond the sight or auditory range of the room. The remainder of the committee would then select a card from a pack, or otherwise transcribe a name or number which occurred to them at that moment. The following verbatim report of the subsequent events will provide you with a conception of the results generally obtained. The report proceeds to state, upon re-entering the room, the young girl would usually stand with her face positioned toward the wall, placed thus by us. But sometimes she would stand with her eyes directed toward the ground for a period of silence varying from a few seconds to a minute, until she called out to us some number, card, or whatever it might be. The report states that in the case of providing the names of objects chosen, the child achieved success in 6 cases out of 14. In the case of naming small objects held in the hands of members of the committee, she succeeded in 5 out of 6. In the case of naming cards, she succeeded in 6 out of 13. In the case of stating fictitious names chosen by the committee, she succeeded at a first trial in 5 out of 10. One of the experiments is reported as follows. One of the children was dispatched into an adjoining room, the door of which was closed. The committee then thought of some object in the house and transcribed the name upon paper. The most rigorous silence was observed. We then all silently contemplated the name of the item selected. In a few seconds, the door of the adjoining room opened, and the child would appear, generally bearing the object selected. No one was permitted to leave the room after the object had been decided upon. No communication with the child was conceivable, as her location was frequently altered. Further, the only instructions provided to the child were to fetch some object in the house that we would decide upon and would keep in mind to the exclusion of all other ideas. In this manner we wrote down, inter alia, a hairbrush and it was retrieved, an orange and it was retrieved, a wineglass and it was retrieved, an apple and it was retrieved, etc. The report to the Society summarizes the following results. 382 trials were conducted in the series. In the test of identifying the chosen letters of the alphabet, cards, and numbers of 2 figures, the probabilities against the girl were 21 to 1, 51 to 1, and 89 to 1, respectively. In the case of stating chosen surnames, the odds against her were very much in excess of the figures just cited. In the specific instance of experiments concerning the nomination of chosen playing cards, it was computed that a simple conjecturer, governed by the laws of probability, could accurately identify only 7 1/3 items from an aggregate of 382 trials. The tangible results procured by the child were as follows. On the initial attempt, 127. On the secondary attempt, an additional 56. And on the tertiary attempt, a further 19. Thus constituting a grand total of 202 successes from a possible 382. On a singular occasion, 5 cards were successfully identified in unbroken succession upon the first trial. The mathematical likelihood of mere conjecture accomplishing this feat, under the law of average or probabilities, is estimated at exceeding 1,000,000 to 1 against the occurrence. Furthermore, this was not merely an isolated or anomalous instance, for there existed other prolonged sequences. To illustrate, there were 2 recorded cases wherein runs of 8 straight consecutive successes were achieved, once concerning names and once concerning playing cards. Regarding the instance of the 8 consecutive cards, it has been calculated that the odds opposing the young female would amount to at least 140 million to 1, in accordance with the law of average and probabilities. To comprehend the full import of this statistic, it may assist the reader to consider that the feat was analogous to selecting one specific individual from a population of 140 million, nearly double the contemporary population of the United States. Yet, there exist individuals who would dismiss such phenomena with the cursory remark of mere coincidence. The curiosity surrounding the Creary children solicited the attention of Professor Balfour Stewart, Doctor of Laws and Fellow of the Royal Society. This distinguished gentleman testifies as follows. In the primary instance, when I was in attendance, the thought reader was positioned outside a door. The object or entity conceived was inscribed upon paper and silently circulated among the company within the room. The thought reader was subsequently summoned, and within the span of perhaps a minute, the answer was provided. Definite objects located within the room, for example, were initially contemplated, and in the majority of instances the responses were accurate. Numbers were then conceived, and the answers were generally correct, though naturally there existed certain cases of error. The appellations of towns were visualized, and a significant number of these were accurate. Subsequently, fanciful names were contemplated. I was requested to conceive of certain fanciful names, transcribe them, and circulate them among the company. I then conceived of and inscribed upon paper Bluebeard, Tom Thumb, and Cinderella, and the responses were entirely correct. Subsequent experiments involving the Creary children, conducted at the residence of the renowned investigator, Mr. Frederick William Henry Myers, in Cambridge, England, proved equally efficacious. The children and their respective ages were as follows: Mary, 17, Alice, 15, and Maud, 13. The percentage of successes obtained at the residence of Mr. Myers corresponded favorably with those secured elsewhere. One remarkable result was achieved, however, which had not been previously realized. On one occasion, the child was requested to identify the suit of cards selected in sequence. That is to say, the child was asked to designate which suit, hearts, diamonds, clubs, or spades, belonged to the card drawn, observed by the committee, and subsequently contemplated. Upon this occasion, the child achieved a run of 14 unbroken, consecutive successes. The odds against such a triumph were 4,782,969 to 1. We shall conclude by mentioning another extraordinary series of experiments conducted by the same society. The mind reader in question was Mr. M. G. A. Smith of England. Among other startling feats successfully executed by Mr. Smith, the reproduction of geometrical figures was perhaps the most notable. In the performance of this feat, Mr. Smith sat blindfolded within a room belonging to the committee, with a pad of paper positioned before him and a member of the committee seated on either side. A designated member of the committee would then exit the room and, behind a closed door, sketch a geometrical figure at random. Upon returning to the room, the figure would be displayed to the committee, as well as to Mr. Douglas Blackburn, who functioned as the transmitter for Mr. Smith, the latter being designated as the receiver. The transmitter, with eyes closed, then assumed a position immediately behind Mr. Smith, albeit at a distance of 2 feet. No physical contact was permitted, this precaution being adopted to obviate accusations of confederacy or collusion. The transmitter would subsequently concentrate his mind with great intensity for several minutes, and within a brief interval, Mr. Smith would receive the impression of the mental image residing in the mind of the transmitter, thereupon commencing the attempt to reproduce it upon paper. In the series of experiments extending over a period of 4 days, 37 drawings were produced, of which only 8 were deemed unsuccessful. Let it be noted, 29 successes out of a possible 37. The committee reports that it exercised every precaution to guard against clandestine signals, and that confederacy, fraud, collusion, or similar methodologies were indisputably precluded. The 8 instances of failure comprised 4 cases in which Mr. Smith received no mental impression and consequently could not reproduce the drawing, and 4 cases in which the drawing was so vague and imperfect as to be designated a total failure. Certain figures were grotesque, unusual, and intricate, yet all were reproduced in a more or less perfect manner. The sketches were executed deliberately and without hesitation, appearing as though Mr. Smith had actually beheld the figure displayed to the transmitter only moments prior. On one occasion, to ensure double protection against collusion, the committee sealed Mr. Smith's ears with putty, secured a bandage around his eyes and ears, drew a bolster case over his head, and subsequently covered him entirely with a blanket that completely enveloped his body and head. Even under these extraordinary conditions, he reproduced the figures with his customary success. We could proceed by recounting case after case, experiment after experiment, conducted by these scientific bodies of erudite and meticulous men. However, the narrative would prove no more convincing than that which has been related above. Ultimately, there exists a method of satisfying oneself that is far more conclusive than the perusal of experimental results obtained by others. That is, to learn to perform the feats of mind reading oneself. By means of minimal practice, you shall be enabled to reproduce many of the demonstrations of public performers, as well as the experiments of the scientific societies. And when you have realized that you possess the capacity to execute these acts, you shall require no further proof regarding the reality of the science of mind reading. Lesson 3. The physiological basis of direct nerve communication. Mind reading is categorized by authoritative figures into 2 general classes: contact mind reading and telepathic mind reading. The former of these classes, contact mind reading, is substantiated by physical conjunction between the transmitter and the receiver in order to provide a facile conduit for the passage of the vibrations, thought waves, nerve currents, or magnetism of the transmitter. The latter class, telepathic mind reading, is demonstrated by the transference of the waves, vibrations, currents, or magnetism of the transmitter to the receiver across the ether, traversing space without the more convenient neural cabling of the 2 agents. You will readily perceive that these 2 classes of phenomena bear a close resemblance to the 2 classes of telegraphic phenomena, the wire system and the wireless system. A striking analogy exists between electrical phenomena and mental force phenomena throughout the entirety of the subject, and this specific topic of mind reading constitutes merely one of the manifold forms of this correspondence. We shall commence by imparting instructions regarding the initial form, contact mind reading, as it represents the simplest and most accessible method of accomplishment and demonstration. Furthermore, the most preeminent telepathists have been disciplined through the practice of contact mind reading at the inception of their training. The former conduces to the latter, precisely as the conventional wire telegraph naturally evolved into the wireless system, which even now exists but in its infancy. At this juncture, we desire to elucidate a most grievous error and unjust judgment, into which certain self-styled scientists and investigators have fallen regarding this matter of contact mind reading. To provide a more distinct conception of the nature of this fallacy, we must direct your attention to the fact that contact mind reading has been accorded extensive publicity through the advertisements and exhibitions of several celebrated public performers and their lesser imitators. These performers, akin to many others, have sought to present an attractive public entertainment rather than a scientific demonstration, and certain among them have found it far more expedient to fabricate some of the demonstrations rather than to execute them in accordance with scientific principles. Consequently, meticulous investigators soon discovered that, in specific instances, there existed no mind reading whatsoever, but merely a clever imitation which was designated as muscle reading. In other words, rather than the performer receiving his mental impressions from the mind of the transmitter via the nervous system of other individuals, he would press against him. Through a clever system of pushing, pulling, leading, and leaning, he would detect the muscular movements of the transmitter, and by careful practice would learn to interpret these movements so as to acquire an indication of the location of the hidden objects, thereby practically being led or pushed toward the location. Yet, even in such instances, the performer would of necessity be compelled to employ a degree of genuine contact mind reading to consummate the feats. The sole advantage the performer accrued by resorting to these inequitable methods was that it proved less fatiguing to his mind and enabled him to simulate his way through the performance with diminished mental exhaustion. The investigators, easily detecting the aforementioned fabricated performances, arrived at the conclusion that the entire phenomenon was a deception and could be explicated entirely by the muscle reading theory. Thus, the news was disseminated widely, and you will encounter a number of volumes composed to explain contact mind reading upon this hypothesis. Naturally, a portion of the public may prefer to accept this erroneous theory. However, we wish to state here positively that if any person will honestly investigate for himself, and will learn to execute the demonstrations personally, he or she will soon discover that muscle reading holds no relevance to the genuine phenomena. The proof of the matter lies in the execution thereof, and you may ascertain the truth for yourself if you will but attempt the feats and demonstrations herein provided, exactly as we teach them. The result of such practice will cause you to share with us the indignation arising from attempts to disparage a noble scientific principle and practice through an explanation derived from witnessing fraudulent imitations of the genuine article. The truth remains that the muscles possess no more connection to the passage of mental currents or waves from the transmitter to the receiver than they do to the transmission of nervous sensations from body to brain, or motor impulses from brain to body. When you desire to close your hand, you transmit a nervous current from your brain to the muscles controlling your hand. The current traverses the nervous system and is thereby distributed over the muscles, causing them to contract. A current from a galvanic battery will induce the muscles to act in an identical manner. However, the muscle constitutes the machinery affected and set into motion, whereas the nerves are the delicate telegraphic wires leading to the parts. Thus it is with this transmission of mental waves and currents. The brain of the transmitter, aroused by his active will, emits a powerful current or wave through his nervous system. Upon reaching the extremity of his fingers, it leaps across the minute space separating his nerves from the nerves of the receiver, enters the nervous system of the latter, and influences his actions. The receiver, being in a passive state with his brain transmitting practically no impulses over his nerves, exists in a receptive condition to the imparted nervous current, which acts upon him somewhat like an impulse from his own brain, only of a weaker magnitude. That constitutes the entire secret of contact mind reading. It may be termed nerve reading if you prefer, but it is certainly not muscle reading. Anatomists acknowledge that the fingertips of a person of fine sensibilities and delicate touch are replete with masses of nerve matter similar to that forming parts of the brain. In fact, they are diminutive finger brains, and they will emit, convey, and receive delicate impulses from one mind to another. Those among you who have experienced the peculiar touch of such individuals can bear witness to the fact that a subtle magnetism or current passed from them to you. This is a fact well established among investigators of psychic phenomena, and such individuals deride the crude muscle reading theories, for they have disproved them repeatedly in actual, careful experiments. You may achieve the same, provided you practice the demonstrations presented in this volume. The fact that the cultivated contact mind reader usually proceeds ahead of his transmitter, rather than being led by him, and that he usually allows the latter's arm to hang limp, instead of being muscularly contracted, constitutes further proof of the absurdity of the aforementioned theory. Furthermore, wires may be utilized between the two persons, or indeed, a third person may be positioned between them. Yet, as we have stated, ultimately the finest and sole genuine test is to attempt the experiments yourself and ascertain that muscle reading is unrelated to the true phenomena. The experimenter will soon discover that when he becomes immersed in the work and is engaged in a search for a hidden object by means of mind reading, he will forget the transmitter entirely. He will nearly forget his whereabouts and will feel himself floating and gliding over the floor, scarcely touching it with his toes. He will find himself drawn or impelled irresistibly toward the hidden object, as if by some external energy or fine force. He will perceive the hidden object drawing him like a magnet and attracting him to the spot. He will forget his audience and all else in his desire to reach the center of attraction. These experiences cannot be adequately explicated in print, but the investigator will soon learn to recognize them for himself, and he will be amazed and filled with wonder at the strange psychical phenomena in which he is taking a principal part. Only then, and at no prior juncture, will he possess the capacity to intellectually repudiate the preposterous and inequitable hypotheses of muscle reading, and to perceive the crude nature of such purported explications. He will discern that this fallacious theory is as vastly erroneous as the ignorant notion that telegraphic communiques are transmitted by the wires being physically tugged or jerked, rather than serving merely as conduits for the transit of the electric fluid or magnetic waves. He will categorize such ostensible scientists alongside those skeptics who, upon the initial introduction of gas lighting to the British House of Parliament, insisted that the pipes rendered the edifice perilous, presuming they would become heated by the passage of the light, and who, observing the system in actual operation, would gingerly palpate the pipes with gloved fingers, marveling at the absence of perceptible heat. We trust that we have elucidated sufficient evidence to persuade you of the absurdity inherent in the muscle reading theory, and to instill within you a sufficient degree of interest to demonstrate the matter for yourself. Many of our readers have undoubtedly witnessed the public exhibitions of the various renowned contact mind readers who have toured the principal metropolises of this nation and foreign lands. Naturally, the typical public practitioner soon ascertains that the average patron of his exhibition attends primarily to be amused and entertained, rather than to receive instruction. Consequently, he is inclined to gradually incorporate sensational elements into the performance for the purpose of thrilling and mystifying the audience, cognizant that such actions will gratify his patrons more effectively than if he were to present a strictly scientific demonstration of the science of contact mind reading as conducted in the psychological laboratories of the subject's eminent investigators. Certain of these public performers have even proceeded so far as to introduce spurious features to their exhibitions, employing confederates and otherwise utilizing unscientific methods to intensify the interest and satisfaction of their audiences. Yet, notwithstanding this fact, the average public mind reader, despite his sensational embellishments, generally affords his audience a sufficient quantity of the genuine phenomenon to render his performance of adequate scientific interest, thereby making it worthy of attendance by the earnest student of the subject. Furthermore, we hold the conviction that the era is approaching when a strictly scientific performance will prove of sufficient public interest to render it viable for a new class of entertainers and lecturers to emerge and assume prominence, instructing the populace regarding this profound subject and illustrating their theories through striking experiments along scientific lines. It is our anticipation that this volume will contribute significantly toward educating the public mind to appreciate such an entertainment, as well as serving to prepare future entertainers for their life's vocation. However, in this treatise, we shall address the subject as though a parlor demonstration were the sole objective, and our instructions shall be directed chiefly toward that end. Nevertheless, we wish to assert that any individual who meticulously studies these directives, and who diligently practices the feats and exercises, will be able to gradually cultivate sufficient proficiency to present a successful public performance, and perhaps reap a substantial measure of renown and financial remuneration. The principles governing the parlor demonstration and the public performance are identical. These very instructions and directions have been studied and applied by some of the premier practitioners currently appearing before the public, illustrating the wonders of contact mind reading. Thus, should any student of this work possess aspirations toward public performance, they will discover herein the methods calculated to develop them into a successful public entertainer and demonstrator. Any individual may develop themselves into a proficient contact mind reader through practice and perseverance. As in all other endeavors in life, some will succeed more notably than others, and some will find the task less arduous than their peers. Yet all may cultivate a highly respectable degree of proficiency within a brief period. A modicum of careful, conscientious practice and experimentation will yield miraculous results. Mind-reading feats depend upon the degree of will and concentration on the part of the transmitter, and upon the degree of receptivity and passivity on the part of the receiver. We presume that the student will desire to act as a receiver rather than as the transmitter. Accordingly, we shall address him in such a capacity, with this understanding established. However, we shall also provide herein comprehensive directions for the transmitter, to endow the student with the methods necessary to act in either capacity, and also to enable him to instruct the transmitter in his functions. The receiver should comprehend the duties of the transmitter, in order that optimal results be obtained, and that the proper harmony and conditions of rapport may be established. Lesson 4. Cultivating psychic harmony through rhythmic breathing. The student ought to conduct practice in privacy with the assistance of a few associates before he ventures before a parlor audience, for by adopting this course, he surmounts the initial absence of self-confidence and the awkwardness that is natural to the novice in any novel sphere of endeavor. Through diligent and repeated practice, he acquires confidence in himself by reason of his increasing success in his experiments. Furthermore, he eliminates the unrefined edges of his actions, such that when he finally appears before an audience, he will feel perfectly self-possessed and at ease. Thus, he shall be enabled to devote his entire attention to his work, devoid of distracting self-consciousness and clumsiness. Initiate the development exercises by selecting one or more acquaintances who possess a sympathetic disposition toward you and who evince an interest in the subject. One must strictly exclude any unsympathetic or uncongenial individuals from the vicinity during practice, for such persons tend to divert one's attention from the task and truly exert a detrimental effect upon the preliminary operations. Designate one of your associates as the transmitter and assume the role of the receiver yourself. Commence your practice by establishing a psychic harmony or rapport between yourself and your transmitter via the agency of rhythmic breathing. Although this aspect of the endeavor has been disregarded by many investigators of the subject, it remains a feature of paramount importance and is conducive to the production of the superlative results within these lines of psychic demonstrations. The term rapport is one frequently encountered in occult and psychic literature. The word is defined by Webster as relation, conformity, correspondence, and sympathetic accord. It is employed by occultists to denote the state of possessing harmonious vibrations with another. The occult teachings posit that every individual possesses his or her own rate of mental vibration which, when in harmonious accord with the vibrations of another, induces the most favorable conditions for the production of mental or psychic phenomena, or mental relations, sympathetic understanding, etc. This harmonious vibration does not explicitly necessitate that the two persons be attuned to precisely the identical pitch, but rather that their keynotes must harmonize, in lieu of producing discord. An analogy involving the notes of a musical scale will elucidate the principle thoroughly. When two persons are in rapport with each other, there exists a mental and psychic harmony between them which is productive of the most efficacious mental cooperative work. Hence, one perceives the necessity of superior rapport conditions in mind reading. Rhythmic breathing has been known to occultists of antiquity as one of the important adjuncts of psychic phenomena, and its utilization in affecting rapport relations is thoroughly understood by all practical occultists. Rhythmic breathing constitutes the act of a person breathing in a slow, measured, and regular cadence. It may be acquired by enumerating the indrawn breath, the retained breath, and the outgoing breath, utilizing regular beats analogous to the rhythmic ticking of a large clock. By way of illustration, draw in your breath slowly, counting mentally in accordance with the ticking of an imaginary large timepiece. 1, 2, 3, 4. Subsequently, retain the breath counting 1, 2. Then exhale slowly 1, 2, 3, 4. The governing principle is that the indrawn breath should possess the same number of counts as the outgoing breath, with the retained breath occupying but 1/2 the counts of either of the others. The aforementioned count illustrates this matter. Adept occultists derive their time beat from their arterial pulsations, yet this is not absolutely imperative in this connection. The principal point regarding rhythmic breathing that we wish to impress upon you at this juncture is that the two persons, the transmitter and the receiver, should breathe in unison with each other. That is to say, in perfect time and rhythm. This respiration in unison will rapidly establish the optimum rapport conditions between them. From 4 to 7 rhythmic breaths will suffice to establish the requisite conditions in ordinary instances. In the execution of a test, in the event that you should perceive the power of the transmitter to be waning, you should halt and request him to breathe in unison with you for a moment, and subsequently recommence your work. By breathing somewhat audibly, the other individual will perceive your cadence, such that it is unnecessary for you to instruct him in the science or theory of rhythmic breathing. Simply instruct him to breathe in unison, keeping time with you. Commence all your practicing with this rapport breathing, and preface each demonstration with it as well. You will discover that it exerts a highly soothing, calming, and quieting effect upon both persons, and will engender in each a mental earnestness and concentration that will facilitate the demonstration of mind reading. We shall not mention this rhythmic breathing or rapport condition when we proceed to provide the detailed directions for the demonstration, Yet it must be borne in mind that it should be observed in each instance. Admittedly, you will be able to attain results without it, but neither so easily nor so thoroughly and satisfyingly. It is advisable to conclude your practice by taking a few deep breaths independently, and not in unison with the transmitter. This action dissolves the rapport condition. General directions. The primary prerequisite for a successful demonstration of mind reading is the acquisition or possession by the transmitter of a lucid concept of direction in his mind. The associated requisite is that the transmitter be capable of concentrating his will upon the mind of the receiver, impressing upon him the sense of direction so forcibly that he will move in accordance with the will of the transmitter. Retain in memory the 2 points to be observed by the transmitter. Commence by having the transmitter standing adjacent to you in the center of the room, whilst you remain blindfolded. Have him mentally designate some specific corner of the room, divulging nothing to you regarding his choice. Then, let him concentrate his mind upon that single corner, to the exclusion of every other part of the room. Subsequently, have the transmitter clasp your left hand with his right hand, while you grasp his fingers in your hand and elevate the hand to your forehead. Position the hand against your forehead, situated just above your eyes. Instruct him then to will that you traverse to the corner of the room that he has selected, shutting out all other thoughts from his mind and concentrating his entire attention upon the projection of his will. He must not content himself with merely forming a mental picture of the selected corner, but must think of the direction of that corner, precisely as he would in the event he wished to walk there himself. He must not merely contemplate that corner. He must think there, utilizing the sense of direction. He must will that you shall go there, carrying the words "go there" in his mind. You, the receiver, must place yourself in a perfectly passive and receptive state of mind, abnegating your own will for the time being, and being perfectly willing and desirous of being mentally directed or led by the will of the transmitter. He is the active agent, and you are the passive recipient. It is the potency of his will and the degree of your receptivity that renders the demonstration a success. Maintain your eyes in a closed state, even though you be blindfolded, for by so doing you induce a passive state of mind, and even the stray glimpses that you might catch through the handkerchief will serve only to distract you. You must exclude sights and even the visualization of sights. Stand motionless for a moment or two, awaiting impressions from the mind of the transmitter, who is formulating the mental command. Go there, I say, while at the same time he is willing that you follow his command. After an interim of a moment or two of passive and receptive waiting, you will begin to feel an impulse to move forward. Acquiesce to this impulse and take the first step, which will often be in a direction entirely divergent from the selected corner. The function of this first step is merely to commence motion. As you undertake these preliminary strides, you shall perceive a more lucid impulse guiding you toward the truly selected corner, finding yourself physically pivoting to align with it. Do not succumb to impatience, for you are merely in the process of learning to apprehend these impressions. Advance 1 foot tentatively, balancing your weight upon the ball of the opposing foot. Ere long, you will sense a compulsion to traverse a specific trajectory, which shall culminate in your progression toward the correct corner. You will shortly become cognizant of being navigated by the will of the projector, whose mind operates upon your own, guiding and directing you toward the designated locus. It is arduous to articulate the precise sensation you will undergo. However, a modicum of practice will soon elucidate the matter. Adhere to the impulse, and you will presently commence to perceive the mental mandate. This way, this way. No, not in that direction, but this way until you arrive at the desired spot, whereupon you shall sense the command. That is correct. Halt where you stand. This is the location. Should you commence? Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.